Hey there guys, Buddy here. So in terms of economic geography, we will be starting with the structure of the economy. Now this is just going to give you a basic introduction to economic geography, and this video is going to discuss the four main sectors of our economy. And I will provide you with some definitions. We will also look at the contributions of each sector to the economy and employment. So there are four main economic sectors. So your primary, secondary, tertiary and quaternary sector. So what is the primary sector? The primary sector involves the extraction or harvesting of natural resources directly from the earth. These are raw materials used for food, energy or production. Remember, this sector is all about removing your natural resources from the environment. So activities will include agriculture. An example of agriculture will be maize farming in the Free State. The next activity will be fishing, and examples will be small-scale fishing along the Western Cape coast. Another major activity will be mining. Example will be gold in Gauteng, coal in Mpumalanga, and platinum in the northwest. Now what we need to remember is that South Africa has a very rich mining history, right? We were once the world's leading gold producer. And I think we reached our peak in like the 1970s, and we were only overtaken by China in 2007, I believe. Now the activities that take place within the primary sector are going to be labor intensive. Think about farming, think about mining. Those are very labor intensive activities, right? And these are often going to be your rural based activities. You're not going to find farming and mining taking place in an urban area. And again, these activities are going to be vulnerable to your environmental changes. So think about droughts, think about flooding. That can all affect our agriculture. So what is the secondary sector? The secondary sector involves the processing or manufacturing of raw materials into finished or semi-finished goods. Now, if you remember, the primary sector was all about extracting and removing these raw materials. Now, the secondary sector is going to take it one step up. They're now going to take these raw materials and they are going to process or manufacture it into finished or semi-finished goods. Examples will be food processing. Think of fruit canning in Paarl. Another example will be manufacturing. Think about the BMW car plant in Rosslyn, Pretoria. Think about construction, right? Building homes, roads and bridges. And another example will be your textile or clothing production. Think about how many clothing factories Durban has. And all these activities are just going to add value to these raw materials, right? And it's going to be often located in urban areas or in industrial zones. Now, one thing to remember is that manufacturing is going to contribute significantly to South Africa's GDP. Don't worry what that is, we will come to that definition soon. So what is the tertiary sector? The tertiary sector involves providing services rather than goods. These services support both the primary and secondary sectors and directly serve the public. So think about your community. If you can think of a service that's being offered, most likely that service is going to be part of the tertiary sector. So think of transport, right? Think of taxis, think of buses. Think about healthcare, your doctors, your hospitals, your nurses. Think about education. Think about teachers and tutors. Also banking, retail, tourism and law. All of these activities will fall under the tertiary sector. Now remember, these are all service-based activities. That means that they're going to require skills and education, and they're usually going to be concentrated in your urban areas. So what is the quaternary sector? The quaternary sector is a high-tech sector based on knowledge, information and high-level services. It includes research, education and information technology and other knowledge-based services. Now examples will be your ICT companies, so think of MTN and Vodacom. Remember, research institutions, universities and private education services all will fall under your quaternary sector. Even consulting firms, your legal and your financial analysis. Now we need to understand that in order to provide these services, high-skilled labor is going to be required. And again, it's mostly going to be your urban-based services. So please take a screenshot of the table that's going to be displayed on your screen, as this gives you a very nice breakdown of each sector, what it does, and examples. So your primary sector is going to extract raw materials, and examples will be mining in Rustenburg and maize farming. Your secondary sector is going to manufacture or process goods, and examples will be car plants in Rosslyn and your food factories. Your tertiary sector involves providing services, and examples would be tourism in Cape Town and banking in Joburg. And our quaternary sector provides knowledge and information-based services, and examples will be universities and ICT in Gauteng. Now, let's take a look at some definitions that you will need to know throughout the economic geography chapter. The first definition will be the gross domestic product, often referred to as GDP. So the GDP is the total value of all goods and services produced within the borders of a country in 1 year. Now remember, this is the measure of a country's overall economic activity, right? And it's going to include both the local and your foreign companies that are going to be operating within the country. So let's take an example, right? Now if BMW builds and sells cars in South Africa, right, that production is going to be included in South Africa's GDP despite the car company being German. The next definition will be the gross geographic product, also known as the GGP. Now, the GGP is the total value of goods and services produced within a specific province or geographic region in 1 year. Now, this is going to be very similar to the GDP. However, it's only going to focus on a single province, not the entire country, right? The gross geographic product is basically going to help us compare the economic performance between regions. For example, let's say Gauteng versus Limpopo. Now, let's say Gauteng produces more services and goods than any other province in South Africa. That means that Gauteng will have the highest GGP in the country. And our third definition will be the gross national product, so your GNP. The GNP is the total value of all goods and services produced by the citizens and businesses of a country, no matter where in the world they are located. Now, this is going to include the income that is earned by South Africans abroad. Now, let's say someone from South Africa is working in the US, right? Their income is going to be included into our GNP because at the end of the day, they are South Africans. Now, your GNP is going to exclude any income that is going to be earned by foreigners within South Africa. So let's take an example, right? If a South African mining company is going to earn money in Zambia, right? That income is going to be part of South Africa's GNP, but not its GDP because it's outside of South Africa. I hope that doesn't sound too confusing. But anyway. So now we need to understand that South Africa is going to be an LEDC, right? They're going to be a less economically developed country. So we are going to face many challenges. Some of those challenges include poverty, right? That's when people do not have enough money to meet basic needs like food, housing, and education. Another challenge will be unemployment, right? That's when people who are willing to work, they cannot find any jobs. Now, when thinking about poverty, we also need to think about the widening wealth gap, right? That's going to be the growing difference in income and wealth between rich and poor people. Now, a crazy stat is that South Africa has one of the highest inequality rates anywhere in the world. Another challenge will be the HIV and AIDS pandemic. That's going to be a major health crisis that's going to affect the working age population. And we need to think about one of South Africa's biggest challenges, which is crime and corruption. And remember, with high crime rates, that's going to discourage any investment in tourism, which means we're not going to be making money. And that's going to further lead to unemployment. We haven't even spoken about load shedding and our electricity crisis. So here's a quick table for you to take a screenshot of, and you can refer to it later when you're doing your own self-study. This is just going to provide you with the challenges we face in South Africa and the effect on the economy, as well as its geographic link. Now let's take a look at the following stats. Now these stats are going to be from the year 2023, and obviously each year it is going to change. Now don't stress, because in your exam paper, they will provide you with the stats for the specific year that they will base your questions off of. So in terms of 2023, your primary sector contributed to 2.6% of the GDP. Your secondary sector contributed 24.6% of the GDP, whereas your tertiary sector contributed 62.6% of your GDP. Now in terms of employment, your primary sector, it contributed 18.8% of employment. Your secondary sector contributed 17.7% of employment, and your tertiary sector contributed to 63.5% of employment. Now let's interpret this data and see what it's actually trying to tell us. Now, in terms of our primary sector, employment is going to be high at 18.8%, but its contribution to the GDP is going to be very low at about 2.6%. Now, that tells us a lot, right? Now, many people in South Africa, especially in your rural areas, they're going to be working in farming and fishing. Now, remember, these jobs are not going to add much money to the economy, either because it's going to be subsistence farming or low-paying work. Remember, subsistence farming is farming that's just for the farmer and his own family, right? He's not going to be selling those goods that he's going to be farming. In terms of our secondary sector, it's going to make up a good portion of our GDP, right? So that's going to be 24.6%. But it's only going to consist of 17.7% of jobs. Now that means that industries like mining and factories, they're going to produce a lot of value for our GDP. But they don't need as many workers because think of it, your mines and your factories are all going to have machinery and automation taking place. Therefore, you do not need many people working there. That's why the sector only has 17.7% of jobs. Now, when we're taking a look at our tertiary sector, we can see that it has a massive GDP contribution of 62.6%, and it's going to take up majority of the jobs at 63.5%. Now, this tells us that most South Africans are going to work in service jobs. Think about teaching, think about retail, tourism, banking. And all of these jobs are going to add the most to our country's income, right? So here's a quick summary. Even though the primary sector is going to employ many people, it doesn't make much money for the country, right? The tertiary sector makes the most money and it provides the most jobs, showing how South Africa is a modern urbanizing economy. Today we're going to be talking about the primary sector. Now, the main topics under this section would be agriculture, food security, and mining. So, without wasting time and going back to the previous lesson, we learned that the primary sector is going to involve the extraction of natural resources, obviously from the environment. So, how will agriculture actually contribute to South Africa's economy? Firstly, agriculture is going to produce food for the country. So that means that we're not going to have to import as much. And also, agriculture is going to contribute to food security. Now, we will be looking at food security in a bit more detail later on in the video. So secondly, it's going to earn foreign exchange by exporting crops and animal products. So that means that there's going to be more money that's going to come into the country, which will obviously boost our economy. Thirdly, it's going to contribute to South Africa's GDP. Remember, farmers are going to be paying taxes as well. Agriculture is going to create jobs for millions of people in farming, processing, and transport. It's going to support other industries like manufacturing, trade, and tourism. Agriculture is also going to help your rural communities grow and develop. Remember, farming is going to take place in a rural area where the roads and your other facilities are not going to be developed, right? Now, in order to get these crops from the rural areas, obviously, to your urban areas, the area will have to grow and develop. So that means that roads will have to be built. Other buildings and facilities will also need to be built. So in doing so, agriculture is going to lead to these rural areas growing and developing. So when we're talking about agriculture, there's going to be three different types of farming. We have subsistence farming, we have small-scale farming, and we have your large-scale farming. So let's take a quick look at this table, as it's going to give us a comparison of the characteristics of the three types of farming. So our first category will be the definition itself. So for subsistence farming is farming that is done mainly to feed the farmer's family with no surplus. That means that each and every single type of crop that this farmer will grow, it's all going to be consumed, right? So if anything is left over, it's probably going to be like maybe 1 carrot of potato. You can't go to the market to sell that 1 carrot of potato. So that's what subsistence farming is. You're farming just for yourself and your family. Next, we have your small scale farming, right? So this is farming that's going to be done on smaller plots, and you may sell the surplus for profit, or you can use it to support your family. Now that means that this farming is either going to be done on a commercial or a subsistence level. And when we're looking at our large scale farming, we can see that this is commercial farming done on a large piece of land, obviously for profit. Now, this production of crops are either for your local or overseas markets, and again, it's going to be for a profit, as it is practiced on a commercial level. Now, our next category will be technology. So for your subsistence farming, it's going to be very low tech. That means that you're mostly going to use your traditional tools and you need to use your manual labor. Now, instead of having things like tractors, you're going to have your oxen-driven plows. So that means that all the farming that's going to be done under your subsistence level is all going to be done manually, either by women, by children, or your other family members. But when we're looking at your small-scale farming, it's going to use limited tools and it's going to have basic machinery, sometimes your traditional tools. But with large-scale farming, it's going to be very high-tech. You're going to use these advanced tractors, you're going to use complex irrigation systems, there's going to be the use of fertilizers, and many of these large-scale farms will also use your genetically modified crops. Now again, we will be talking about genetically modified crops later on in the video. Now when we're looking at yield, it's basically going to mean how many crops are harvested at the end of its life cycle. So in terms of subsistence farming, it's going to be a very low yield. That means it's often going to be insufficient for the needs, as it can be vulnerable to drought. So what that means is, in subsistence farming, the vegetables that they're going to get out is sometimes not even enough for the farmer and his family to consume, right? It's going to be a very low yield. When we're looking at your small-scale farming, you're going to have a moderate yield per hectare. That means there's going to be a medium amount. And it's often going to be dependent on weather and manual effort. And obviously, a variety of crops are going to be grown. However, when we're looking at your large-scale farming, there's going to be a very high output per hectare. Now obviously that's due to your mechanization and your inputs. And another thing to note about your large-scale farming is that generally it's going to focus on one type of crop. So let's say maybe sugarcane. Whereas with your small-scale farming or your subsistence farming, they're going to grow multiple different types of crops. So whether it's carrots, potatoes, things like that. They're not going to only focus on one type of crop. When we're looking at size, your subsistence farming is usually going to be less than 1 hectare. That means it's going to be quite small plots of land, and again it's going to be family run. With our small scale farming, we can have a few hectares or less, and it's generally going to be smaller plots on a single unit. Again, it can be run by women and the rest of the family. So in terms of your large scale farming, you're going to have hundreds to thousands of hectares. That means that this land is going to be huge, right? And obviously with huge land, you're going to have a large number of employees, all of which will be fulfilling your different roles. Now in terms of importance, your subsistence farming is going to be critical for food security, and it does not contribute to the economy. Because remember, we did mention that in terms of your subsistence farming, it's just going to be enough for the farmer and his family to eat, right? It's not going to be sold for money, so it's not going to lead or contribute to the economy. Now when we say it's critical for rural food security, we're basically saying it's critical in ensuring that people in the rural area will have enough clean, safe food to eat, right? So in terms of small-scale farming, it's going to be important for local markets and rural income. So basically, it's going to help to reduce poverty in your rural areas. Because remember, some of these crops will be sold and you are earning an income there, right? It's going to reduce your rural-urban migration because remember, due to the small-scale farming, there are going to be jobs and there is going to be food. So that means the amount of people that are going to travel from your rural area to your urban area will be a lot lower. Now it's not going to fully decrease it, but it will drop it quite a bit. Because remember, what's the main reason that people move from your rural areas to your urban areas? There's not going to be jobs, there's not going to be money, there's not going to be food, right? And again, your small scale farming is going to promote food security in your rural areas. Now with your large scale farming, it's going to be a major contributor to food supply for local and international markets, because remember, a lot of these crops are going to be exported as well. Now obviously with each type of farming, we're going to experience some problems. In terms of subsistence farming, it's going to be vulnerable to drought, poverty, lack of infrastructure, because remember, this is just going to be farming that's done in your backyard. These farmers are not going to have any access to training, and it can be affected by your natural hazards. So let's say you have very heavy rain and there's going to be flooding. All your crops are going to die. And once all these crops are destroyed, that's going to lead to further poverty and food insecurity. Now, in terms of your small scale farming, you're going to have limited access to credit, markets, and training. Remember, again, this is going to be farming that's done by your family members. You're not going to have so much access to training, and you're not going to be having access to these international markets. So that means that your small scale farmers will have poor infrastructure, right? They will have problems getting finance. Now, in terms of your large-scale farming, remember this is going to be farming done on such a huge scale. So can you imagine how much of money is needed for doing that? Therefore, the first problem is going to be a high input cost. And that's going to be the cost of production. Remember, you're going to need these fancy fertilizers, you're going to need this technical and complex machinery, and that's all going to be very expensive. And also, again, because you're going to be having so many employees, you're going to have labor strikes, and that's going to delay your production times. Another problem in South Africa would be the white commercial farmers leaving the country. And remember, all over the world, not only in South Africa, we're going to be experiencing climate change. Remember, temperatures are increasing, and that's going to affect your crops, and it could potentially lead to you losing all of your crops, right? And especially in terms of your large-scale farming, that can be very detrimental. So now let's take a look at some definitions that we're going to need to know. Firstly, we're going to be looking at import. So that's going to be the act of buying goods and services from another country and bringing them into your own country for sale or use. Now we're looking at import market, and that's going to be the market within a country where your imported goods and services are sold. So now we're going to be taking a look at the opposite of imports. So we're looking at export and export market. So what does export mean? Export is going to be the act of selling goods and services to another country, and your export market is going to be the market in foreign countries where a country's goods and services are sold. So let's say you memorize imports, just think of the exact opposite, and there we go, you have your export. Another definition would be your value-added products. So these are products that have been processed or improved in some way to increase their market value, such as turning raw fruit into fruit juice or jam. Right? Think about taking grapes and turning that into wine. Those are your value-added products. And the last definition would be your home market. So this is the domestic market within a country where goods and services are produced and sold locally rather than exported. Now, in terms of agriculture, the three main products that are going to be produced in South Africa will be cattle, maize, and sugarcane. So let's look at sugarcane first. Where is sugarcane going to be farmed in South Africa? It's going to be mainly farmed in KZN and Mpumalanga along the warm coastal areas. Now, sugarcane is going to grow well in hot, wet climate, and it's going to be used for sugar, ethanol, and other products. So how would sugarcane contribute to South Africa? Firstly, it's going to provide jobs, it's going to earn foreign exchange through exports, and it's going to support the sugar industry. But again, like all types of farming done in South Africa, we are going to experience some problems. So what are these problems? Firstly, drought. Remember, if there's no water, how are you expected to grow sugarcane? Secondly, we have your high production costs, we have pests, diseases, and competition from your cheap sugar imports. Now, in terms of pests and diseases, that can wipe out your entire field of sugarcane. That means that if you have a bad pest or disease that's going to affect your harvest, all your crops are going to die. So next, we're going to look at cattle or beef farming. Now, where in South Africa is this going to be farmed? It's going to be farmed in the Free State, Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, Mpumalanga, and Limpopo. Now, cattle will be farmed for many different things, right? It can be farmed for beef, it can be farmed for milk, hides, and also as part of your cultural traditions. But what is its contribution to South Africa? It's going to provide food, right? Obviously in the form of meat and dairy. It's going to provide jobs, foreign exchange, and your raw materials for industries such as leather. Now, when we're talking about problems that's going to be related to beef farming, we're going to have diseases like foot and mouth. Think about the drought. And obviously, if you have droughts, your grass is not going to grow. There's not going to be any food for these cows. Another problem would be your high feed costs, theft, and limited grazing land due to South Africa's hot conditions. And thirdly, we're going to be looking at maize. So where in South Africa will your maize be farmed? It's going to be farmed in the Free State, Mpumalanga, Northwest, and KZN. Now, maize is going to be South Africa's staple food, and it's grown on both commercial and subsistence farms. So how will maize contribute to South Africa? Firstly, it's going to be the main food source for people, it's going to be feed for animals, exports for foreign exchange, and it's going to be an input for industries such as oil and starch. Some problems related to maize would be drought, pests, obviously like your armyworms, your fluctuating prices, and your high farming costs. So now let's take a look at this table that's going to display the summary of factors that are going to be favoring and hindering agriculture. So firstly, let's take a look at your factors that are going to hinder agriculture, right? So we have climate change. We know climate change and farming do not go together. Temperatures are getting hotter, crops can die, that can lead to droughts, and it can be absolutely detrimental to agriculture. Now the next factor is going to be your natural hazards. So think of droughts and floods. Think about how that's going to affect your farming. Think about how that's going to affect your livestock. If there's going to be droughts, there's not going to be water for them to drink. If there's going to be a drought, all their food sources are going to die because there's no water. The next factor will be diseases and pests. Obviously, we know that, especially in your small scale and your subsistence farming, because the farmers are not going to have a lot of knowledge or training, it's very easy for pests and diseases to take place and occur in these types of crops. And if that's going to happen, again, that will further lead to poverty because their food source is going to be destroyed. And also because of South Africa's climate, wildfires can take place, and again, that will wipe out hectares of your farming land. And another very big factor would be crime, right? We know how many times we hear of cattle being stolen. So that's another major factor that's going to hinder agriculture. And obviously, in terms of your large-scale farming, because there's going to be so many employees working, a lot of the times there are going to be labor strikes taking place. And that's going to bring all production to a halt. Another major factor that's going to hinder agriculture will be HIV and AIDS. Now, in rural areas, people are not going to have access to medication. That means they're just going to get more and more sick and obviously end up dying. Also, a major negative factor would be rainfall. Now, in South Africa, we have very low and unpredictable rainfall. So that is going to lead obviously to your crop failure and your droughts. Now, when we're looking at factors that are going to be favoring agriculture, we can look at your fertile soils in certain regions, right? So think of parts of KZN that have very nice soil. That's going to allow your farmers to be able to grow strong, healthy crops. Another factor that could favor agriculture will be the availability of water from rivers, dams, and your irrigation schemes. Some other factors would be your government support programs and subsidies, access to local and international markets, and your established infrastructure. So think of things like your roads, your storage facilities, and your markets. Okay, so now let's take a look at food security in South Africa. So what is food security? When people at all times have access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs for a healthy life. Now we can break down this definition and make it quite simple. We can just say that food security is when people are going to have access to clean, safe food at all times in order to live a healthy life. Now, with food security, we can have the direct opposite, which is going to be known as your food insecurity. And that's going to be when people lack your regular access to enough safe and nutritious food for normal growth, development, and an active, healthy lifestyle. This can be due to the lack of money, resources, or access. And when talking about food insecurity, we have another extreme form of food insecurity that's going to be known as famine. So famine is an extreme form of food insecurity where there's a widespread shortage of food leading to severe hunger, malnutrition, disease, and a significant increase in deaths. So let's look at the importance of food security in South Africa. Now let's say you're in your exam and they ask this question: what is the importance of food security in South Africa? And let's say for some reason you forgot it, because that does happen, right? You can go to an exam paper and just forget every single thing. That happened to me personally. But my advice would be to just think of all the benefits of having access to clean, healthy food. Firstly, it's going to support good health and nutrition, right? It's going to ensure that people have access to balanced, nutritious food needed for growth, immunity, and overall well-being. Secondly, it's going to reduce poverty and inequality. So food security can help break the cycle of poverty by allowing families to spend less on basic survival and more on education and development. Thirdly, it's going to promote economic stability. A food-secure population is more productive, contributing positively to the economy through work, innovation, and reduced healthcare costs. That means that once people have enough food, basically they're going to be more productive. They're going to be able to do more positive things, right? And that means they're going to be able to work, they're going to be able to earn more money, take care of themselves, take care of their family, contribute to South Africa's economy, and continue to build our country. Number 4 is going to boost your educational outcomes. So children who are well fed perform better in school, increasing their future opportunities and potential. Now think about the children in your rural areas. Well, not only in your rural areas, but think about children who are poor and do not have any food. How are you supposed to focus on your work if your stomach is hungry? But if you have enough food, you're going to be able to perform better in school and you're going to have a better life, right? Number 5, it's going to reduce your social unrest and conflict. Food shortages can lead to crime, protests, and instability. Ensuring food security helps maintain peace and order. So as you can see, if you really sit and think about it, you can come up with different points for the importance of food security. Basically, just sit and think about what's going to happen when people have enough access to food. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and say this is general knowledge. I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but we have some teachers that take like the hardest concepts and they say, oh, this is just supposed to be general knowledge. Like, no, it's not. Calm down. So now let's look at the factors that are going to affect food security. So we have your negative factors. That means that these are going to be factors that are going to hinder your food security. And we have your positive factors. That means that these are factors that are going to promote your food security. So let's start off with your negative factors first. So the first will be your climate change. So this is going to be unpredictable weather, droughts, and floods. Secondly, there's going to be pests and diseases, and this is going to damage your crops and reduce your yields. So next we have soil degradation, and that's going to be due to your overuse, erosion, and poor farming practices. We have a lack of infrastructure, so that means poor transport and storage is going to lead to food loss. Another one that we don't really experience in South Africa is going to be conflict and war, as that's going to displace your farmers and it's going to destroy land. But one that we do experience in South Africa will be poverty and unemployment. This is going to limit the ability to buy food or farm efficiently. High population growth. This is going to increase the food demand faster than you can supply. High level of HIV and AIDS is going to lower your productivity. And in your rural areas, roads are not going to be developed. That means that there's going to be a lot of potholes. It's not going to be tarred. So now let's look at some positive factors. So these are going to be factors that are going to promote food security. So firstly, you're going to have your favorable climate. That means that you can have your regular rainfall and your suitable temperatures, which is ideal for the growth of plants. You have a government support. This is providing subsidies, training, and food security programs. The use of modern technology, which is improved irrigation, tools, and drought-resistant crops. Investment in infrastructure, so that's good roads, storage, and markets. Remember, that's all going to lead to your promotion of food security. Access to credit and markets. This is going to help farmers grow, sell more produce. Education and training. This is going to allow farmers to use better, more efficient methods. The use of genetically modified seeds. Now, obviously, when we're talking about food security, we need to discuss your genetically modified crops and obviously its role in ensuring food security. So firstly, what are genetically modified crops? Genetically modified crops are plants that have been altered using genetic engineering to introduce desirable traits such as resistance to pests, tolerance to drought, or improved nutritional content. This is done by inserting specific genes from one organism into the DNA of the crop. So now when farmers use genetically modified crops, it means that their crops are not going to be easily affected by pests. It's going to be very tolerant to drought. That means that it's not going to consume a lot of water. So if we're going through times of drought, it will survive, it will not die out. So basically, these crops are going to be stronger, more resistant. So your genetically modified crops can help to improve food security in several ways. Firstly, you're going to have an increased yield. So crops are going to grow more food per hectare. These crops are going to have a greater resistance to pests and diseases, and that reduces the need for pesticides and crop losses. In terms of drought and climate resistance, your genetically modified crops can survive in harsh conditions, and obviously you can have improved nutrition. So some genetically modified crops are going to be fortified with vitamins, example your golden rice with vitamin A. And again, one of the most important factors would be reduced input costs for farmers. So there's going to be less need for chemicals or water. Now this table is going to show us the advantages and disadvantages of your genetic modification. So you're welcome to take a screenshot and read it obviously when you're doing a self-study, or you can just pause the video and read it now. So what are some other methods to improve food security? And this is another table that you're welcome to take a screenshot of. This is going to be other methods to improve your food security. Again, you can take a screenshot and read it later. Because if I'm going to go through all of this now, we're going to be sitting here for a very long time. But as you can see, it's not going to be too complex. So now let's look at our next factor, which would be mining. So let's look at how mining is going to contribute to South Africa's economy. Firstly, your mining is going to earn foreign exchange by exporting materials like gold, platinum and coal. It's going to contribute to South Africa's GDP because remember, your mining companies are going to pay a lot of taxes to the receiver of revenue. And obviously that's going to stimulate the growth rate of our economy. It's going to create jobs for thousands of workers. And remember, that's going to contribute to the economy obviously in the form of wages, taxes and salaries. It's going to support industries such as manufacturing, energy and transport. It's going to bring in investments from other countries. Remember, if investments are going to take place, that means there's money coming into our country and our country can continue to develop. It develops infrastructure like roads, railways and electricity. Now remember, these roads and railways are all going to be developed in order to transport the mining equipment, whether it's people or your minerals, from your mines to your industrial areas. It provides raw materials for local industries and it's going to help with community development through mining company projects. So let's look at the significance of mining to the development of South Africa. Mining has been the backbone of South Africa's economy for over a century, right? It led to the growth of major cities like Johannesburg. Mining created transport networks such as railways and roads. It brought foreign investment into the country. Mining encouraged industrial development, so your factories and your processing plants. It provided jobs and reduced poverty for many households. Mining exports helped South Africa trade with other countries, and it contributed to skill development and technological advancement. So by looking at these points, we can see just how much mining has contributed to the development of South Africa. But what are the main products produced in South Africa? Firstly, we're going to have gold. South Africa was once the world's largest producer of gold. Obviously, gold is going to be used in jewelry, coins and electronics, and it has historically been the backbone of the mining industry. It's also the largest foreign income earner. Now, what challenges do we face when it comes to gold? Firstly, we're going to have your declining reserves. Remember, gold is going to run out, and it is actually running out. It's a non-renewable resource, right? We're going to have high production costs. Again, labor strikes are going to take place, and there are a lot of safety concerns in deep mines. Also, we're going to have a lot of diseases spreading due to your mine conditions. Our next product that's going to be produced in South Africa or mined in South Africa would be platinum. So South Africa is the world's leading producer of platinum, and that means that this is going to be a large contribution to our GDP. Platinum is going to be used in jewelry, catalytic converters, obviously in cars, and medical equipment. It also brings valuable foreign exchange. The challenges experienced with platinum mining would be fluctuating world prices is going to affect your income. You're going to have your labor unrest and strikes, and obviously we need to consider the environmental impacts of mining. And thirdly, we're going to have your coal mining. Now, coal is South Africa's main energy source, and it's going to be used for electricity generation. However, it's also going to be exported to other countries, and coal mining is going to support industries like steel production. But the challenges that we experience when it comes to coal mining would be air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. We're going to have health risks for workers. Again, these workers can develop your lung diseases. There's going to be a growing pressure to move towards renewable energy. Remember, coal is not going to be a renewable energy source. It's going to be a non-renewable energy source. That means once it's used, it's gone, right? You're not going to be able to reuse it again and again and again. Now, if you notice that with each major product mined in South Africa, a common problem would be your mine strikes. So what are mine strikes? So mine strikes are when your mine workers are going to stop working in order to protest for better wages, safer working conditions, or improved benefits. Workers are going to use strikes to put pressure on mine owners or the government to meet their demands. Now in South Africa, your mine strikes are going to be very common. Obviously, because mining is dangerous, your wages are going to be low, and sometimes your employees are going to feel that their rights are not respected. So that's going to cause them to now go and strike. So here are some ways in order to reduce your mine strikes. Firstly, provide fair wages and benefits. right? Ensure competitive salaries, bonuses, and benefits like healthcare and housing for mine workers in order to reduce their discontent. The next strategy would be to practice open communication channels. Establish regular dialogue between workers, unions, and management to address your grievances early. Improved working conditions. Now, this is one of the major contributors to your mine strikes. Remember, if you're not going to have good working conditions, how are you going to work there? So you need to provide safe, clean, and humane working conditions to reduce frustrations and hazards. Training and development opportunities. So invest in employee growth through upskilling and promotion prospects, making workers feel valued. If you're going to make workers feel valued, they're going to be happy to work, and that's going to make them very reluctant to go and strike. And you can see these are other strategies, but they're going to be, in one form or another, the same as having your open and clear communication channels. So again, you're welcome to take a screenshot and look at it later. So now we're going to end off with factors that are going to favor mining and factors that are going to hinder mining. So let's look at your factors that are going to favor mining in South Africa. So firstly, there's going to be large reserves of minerals. Remember, South Africa has a lot of gold, platinum, and coal, right? Diamonds as well. We have a skilled labor force and mining expertise, right? Another factor would be advanced mining technology and equipment. There's going to be strong transport links, such as your railways and your ports for exports. There's going to be high global demand for these minerals. Mining contributes greatly to GDP and foreign exchange. And obviously, government assistance will allow mining to take place. But when we're looking at factors that are going to hinder mining in South Africa, obviously there's going to be very high costs of production. So that's going to be things like your labor costs, your electricity, your equipment, because you need very complex equipment, right? Also, you're going to need a lot of these machinery to remove these minerals, to transport these minerals. That costs a lot of money. So that's obviously something that's going to hinder mining in South Africa. We have your mine strikes and labor unrest. Obviously, we just spoke about that, and we spoke about how it can delay production and mining. We have your safety risks and accidents in deep mines. Now think about how often some miners get stuck, in these deep mines. Think about how easy it is to get hurt in those deep mines. Another thing, we have environmental damage and strict regulations. Now certain types of mining will obviously contribute greatly to pollution, right? So that's definitely a negative factor. Another factor would be your falling commodity prices in world markets, the depletion of mineral reserves, right? What's going to happen once all these minerals are removed from the Earth's surface? What's then going to happen? And the last factor that's going to hinder your mining in South Africa would be the distance to markets. So let's take a look at the secondary sector and how it's all about the processing of these raw materials, which were obviously extracted in the primary sector. So firstly, what is the contribution of the secondary sector to the South African economy? Now, whenever you're asked this question, there's always three simple answers that you can give to ensure that you get these marks. Firstly, you're going to say it contributes to the GDP. So the secondary sector, which consists of manufacturing, construction, and electricity, contributes about 20 to 24% of South Africa's GDP. Now, this money will obviously be generated in the form of taxes. Secondly, you're going to say it's going to contribute to foreign exchange, right? So South Africa earns foreign exchange by exporting these manufactured goods. And examples of the manufactured goods that are going to be exported would be cars, wine, fruit juices, and processed metals like steel. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that your manufactured exports are obviously going to be worth more than your raw materials. And that's going to, in turn, help to balance trade. Now, when I say we are helping to balance trade, we actually mean that we're going to increase a country's exports, right? Or we're going to decrease its imports. Obviously, to improve the difference between what it sells to other countries and what it buys from them. Now, when we say we have a positive balance, so that's going to be a surplus, we're actually saying that we're going to export more than we import. And that's going to lead to us bringing in more foreign capital, which will obviously strengthen our currency. Now, a negative balance, which is known as a deficit, is going to occur when your imports are going to be much greater than your exports. So basically, in a nutshell, when we say we are going to balance trade, it means that we're going to increase our exports and decrease our imports. And thirdly, it's going to contribute to job creation. Now, the secondary sector is going to provide millions of jobs, right? Especially in your factories such as textiles, food processing, steel and chemicals. It's going to provide jobs in construction, which is the building of roads, houses, malls and other infrastructure. And it's going to provide jobs in the energy sector, so your Eskom and your power stations. And obviously, job creation is going to reduce unemployment, which will improve the quality of life. So now let's take a quick look at the different types of industries, right? So basically, an industry is going to be any factory or a business where your raw materials are going to be turned into products that people can use. So there's going to be 7 different types of industries in South Africa. The first is going to be your heavy industries. And these are your large-scale industries that are going to need lots of capital, so things like money and machinery, right? They're also going to need a lot of energy and raw materials. These heavy industries will be located on the outskirts of settlements, and it's going to occupy large areas of land. It's also going to use a lot of raw materials and energy. It's going to produce big, heavy products like steel, iron and chemicals. However, it is going to produce quite a bit of pollution. And something that we also have to remember when it comes to your heavy industries is that these heavy industries are going to produce quite a bit of pollution, right? So things like noise pollution and air pollution, right? And an example of these heavy industries will be engineering, shipbuilding, steel and oil refining. So now let's look at the second type of industry, which is going to be your light industry. Now this is technically going to be the opposite of a heavy industry. So this is going to be a smaller, less energy intensive industry, right? It's going to be located close to your CBD and it's going to occupy your small areas of land, which will produce very little pollution, right? Obviously, as compared to your heavy industry. Your light industries are going to make consumer goods, so things that people are going to use on a daily basis. For example, your clothing factories in Durban or your food processing plants. Thirdly, you're going to have your raw material oriented industries. So this industry is going to be located close to raw materials because they are either bulky or heavy to transport. And an example will be Sasol. Now that is your coal to oil industry near coal fields in Mpumalanga. Your fourth type of industry will be your market oriented industry. And that's going to be located close to markets or consumers because your products are perishable, fragile or expensive to transport. Remember, when we're talking about perishable items, we're talking about items that can spoil very quickly. So an example would be your bakeries, your soft drink factories, or your dairies such as cheese or yogurt. Fifth would be your footloose industries. Now these can be set up anywhere because obviously they're not going to depend on any raw materials or heavy transport. That means that the location is not going to be dictated by access to materials or markets. And often these types of industries are going to be technology based or they're going to be service orientated. That means they're going to provide a service, not an actual item. And that means that no pollution is going to be generated. So an example is obviously going to be your IT companies or your call centers. The next type of industry will be your ubiquitous industry. Now this is going to be found everywhere because demand is going to be everywhere. An example will be bottled water, bread, or even printing. And our last type of industry is going to be your bridge or your break of bulk industry. And that's going to be located at places between the source of raw materials and the customer. So an example would be your ship to truck or your rail to road. An example of that would be your oil and sugar refineries. So now let's take a look at the factors that are going to favor industrial development in South Africa. Remember, there's going to be factors that favor and there's going to be the opposite of that, which is your factors that are going to hinder industrial development. So for factors that are going to favor industrial development, firstly, it's going to be your raw materials. Now, South Africa is going to be rich in minerals. So minerals such as gold, platinum, coal, iron ore, and it's going to have a lot of agricultural products. So it's going to have a variety of fruit and crops. And these are all going to provide inputs for industries like mining, steel, and food processing, right? Now, the West Coast will also have a very well-developed fishing industry. Another factor would be your energy supply, right? Now, energy is going to be a very major factor when it comes to cost. And that's why some industries are going to be located very close to energy sources. Now, Eskom obviously is going to provide electricity, although we know some challenges such as load shedding do exist. Now, your coal reserves are going to supply cheap power for industries. The next factor is going to be water. Now, industries are going to need large amounts of water. Examples are your steel or your chemical industries, because remember, water is going to be used either for the processing of these raw materials or is going to be needed for the cooling of machinery. So basically, these industries need to be located close to your water supply. So things like your rivers, your dams, and your water transfer schemes are going to supply these industrial areas. Now, South Africa has very good and well-established road and rail networks. For example, let's take a look at our ports, right? We have your Durban, which is the busiest port in Africa. You have your Cape Town port, you have your Richards Bay port. So I think there's a total of 8 ports in South Africa, right? And we're going to have your 4 international airports. And all of these are going to support your exports and your imports. Number 5 will be your trade and competition. Now, access to international markets through BRICS, SADC, AGOA. Now, access to local and international markets are going to promote competition and trade. Remember, in South Africa, there's not going to be any barriers to trading. That means that South Africa is going to experience free trade. And we know that competition is going to encourage innovation and efficiency. Now, your 6th factor is going to be labor. Now, South Africa is going to have a large labor force available. Now, that's going to consist of your skilled and your semi-skilled workers. Now, it's also going to consist of your unskilled workers, right? We need to remember that as well. Now, South Africa is also going to have your universities and your colleges, which are going to train workers in specialized fields. Now, our last factor is going to be political or your government support. Now, your government policies are going to encourage industrial growth, especially in your outlying rural areas, and it's going to support local industries. Now, examples of these government supports will be your industrial development zones, so your IDZs, your spatial development initiatives, so your SDIs, and your Black Industrialists program. So now let's take a look at the factors that are going to restrict your industrial development in South Africa. So the first factor is going to be your over-concentration. So industries are going to be concentrated in Gauteng, Durban, Pinetown, and Cape Town. Now this is going to lead to overcrowding, traffic congestion, and another factor would be your high land prices. Remember, the high land prices are going to be due to your demand for the land, and that's going to lead to your lower profits because people are paying so much for these land prices, right? Obviously, another effect of your over-concentration would be pollution. And over-concentration in certain areas will lead to other regions that are going to remain underdeveloped. Your next factor is going to be HIV and AIDS. Now that is going to reduce your productivity because your workers are going to be getting sick or they're going to be dying young, right? And this in turn is going to increase costs for companies because remember, companies are going to be expected to provide healthcare, or they're going to need to spend money training these replacements because the workers that have HIV are going to be getting sick or they're going to be dying young. The third factor is going to be your transport or your distance to foreign markets. Now remember, South Africa is going to be far from your major global markets, right? When we're talking about your major global markets, we're talking about the markets in Europe, Asia, and America. Now that means that South Africa, because it's going to be isolated, the costs for your exports will make it difficult for your local industries to compete with the industries that are going to be closer to these international markets in Europe, Asia, and America. And you're also going to have your high transport costs for exports, which will also reduce competitiveness. Your fourth factor is going to be your labor supply, right? Now, many workers are going to be unskilled, and that's going to affect efficiency. Remember, if a worker is unskilled, he's not going to be able to do the best job that he can, right? There's going to be delays, right? There's going to be a lot of setbacks, and that's going to affect your efficiency. Remember, when we're talking about your labor supply, we're going to have strikes, we're going to have wage demands, and we're going to have low productivity, which is going to discourage investment. Now remember, when workers start to strike, that strike is going to cause your production delays. Now your production delays, when it's going to be mixed with your high labor costs, that's going to cause your small businesses to close down. Another factor when it comes to your labor supply is going to be brain drain. So brain drain is going to occur, and this is going to result in skilled workers leaving the country, and then obviously we're going to have to now employ foreigners at much higher costs. Your fifth factor is going to be your cheap imports and your counterfeit goods. Now your imported products, especially from China, are often going to be cheaper than your local products, right? And your local industries will not be able to compete with these imported goods. Now your counterfeit goods are going to undercut prices, and it's going to harm your local industries. Now we know how cheap your fake clothes are going to be, and people will rather go and buy these goods as compared to your locally made goods, and that's going to affect our local industries. Now our sixth factor will be air pollution. Now this is going to be caused by your coal burning power stations, by your factories, by your motor vehicles, and by mining. And there are numerous effects of your industrial pollution. So think about how it's going to affect human health. It's going to kill animals and plants. It's going to cause acid rain. Remember, we spoke about acid rain in a video that we did quite a while ago. We spoke how acid rain is going to damage buildings, it's going to kill plants. And your industrial pollution is also going to cause the quality of air to significantly drop, which is going to reduce the overall quality of life. Now, the causes of air pollution can be asked as an essay question, so let's quickly tackle that. So the first cause of air pollution will be obviously your burning of fossil fuels. So think of coal, think of oil, think of gas as well. Now, the burning of these fossil fuels in factories are going to release harmful gases like carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and your nitrogen oxides. Your industrial smoke and emissions from chimneys are going to pollute the air with dust, soot, and chemicals. The use of outdated machinery and lack of filters or scrubbers is going to increase your toxic gas released. The release of greenhouse gases from energy-intensive industries like steel, cement, and chemical production. The lack of rules and policies that control air pollution. Now, this is going to allow industries to bypass laws. Remember, if we put in place rules and regulations that are going to prevent these industries from releasing large amounts of pollution, that's going to be a major factor or major step forward in reducing air pollution. And lastly, open burning of waste materials such as plastics and chemicals are going to add poisonous fumes to the air. Your seventh factor is going to be your water supply. Now, South Africa is going to be a water scarce country. That means that we're not going to receive a lot of rainfall. Now, droughts, pollution, and competition between households, farming, and industry are going to limit water availability. Now, pollution from various industries is often going to be dumped into your usable water. But what are some solutions to our water supply issue? Firstly, it's going to be water recycling and reuse. So industries can treat and reuse wastewater to reduce the freshwater demand. Your desalination plants, so your coastal industries can use seawater as an alternative source of freshwater. But remember, when we're talking about desalination, right, we're talking about removing the salt content from our ocean water, but that is a very expensive process. So I don't think that's very viable for South Africa. Another solution will be your efficient water management. So that's going to be introducing your water saving technologies like closed loop cooling systems in factories. We have your rainwater harvesting, which is collecting and storing rainwater for industrial use. And lastly, we have your government regulations and incentives. Now, this is basically going to be your policies which are going to encourage industries to use water responsibly and invest in sustainable systems. Our eighth and last factor is going to be your raw materials. Now, some resources like your high quality coal or your certain minerals are becoming depleted, right? And therefore, there's going to be rising costs to extract your deeper ores. Now, many raw materials are going to be exported instead of processed locally, which is going to reduce your industrial growth. And the use of imported raw materials will obviously increase your production costs. So now let's take a look at the 4 core industrial areas in South Africa, right? So the 4 core industrial areas in South Africa are going to be your PWV, which is your Pretoria Witwatersrand Vereniging. It's going to be your Durban Pinetown, your Southwestern Cape, and your Port Elizabeth Uitenhage. Now, these are basically just going to be your main regions in which your industries are going to be concentrated. So here's a nice simple table just giving you the very basic information about each core industrial area. So please feel free to pause the video and read quickly through it, or take a screenshot and keep it for later. Now, when we're looking at your PWV region in Gauteng, we're going to be looking at the factors that are going to favor industrial location. We're going to be looking at the factors that are going to hinder development, and we're going to be looking at the main industrial activities at each area. So with your factors that are going to be favoring industrial location, firstly, it's going to be market, right? Now, this is going to be your largest urban population in South Africa, and that's going to provide a huge local market. Now, that means that there's going to be a great demand, obviously, for a variety of goods, and they will generally have a higher than average buying power. Next will be your transport. Now, the PWV region is going to have an excellent road, rail, and air connections. It's going to be situated close to your OR Tambo International Airport. In terms of labor, there's going to be a large supply of both your skilled and your unskilled workers. Remember, this region is going to be densely populated. That means there's going to be a lot of people which can provide labor. Next will be your raw materials, right? Now the PWV region is going to be close to gold, coal and other mineral resources of the Witwatersrand. So that means that there's going to be an abundance of your raw materials, just like this point mentioned. So things like gold, coal, iron ore, maize and platinum as well, right? Now when we're looking at water, now your Vaal River and your dams are going to supply water for industries and households. And this region is going to receive enough rainfall as well. In terms of power, electricity is going to be supplied from nearby coal-fired power stations. So that means that electricity is going to be relatively cheap because your power is going to be transmitted over your short distances. In terms of relief, remember when we're talking about relief, we're talking about the slope, right? So this area is going to be located on the Highveld. Now that means that it's going to have your flat land. Now your flat land is going to make building and the expansion of industries much easier. Now when we're looking at the factors that are going to hinder development, first is going to be air pollution, right? Secondly, it's going to be water shortages. Thirdly, it's going to be congestion. The fourth factor will be electricity, which is your load shedding. Fifth will be your high crime rates. And sixth is going to be your distance to the nearest port. Remember, the nearest port is going to be your Durban port. The main industrial activities that are going to take place within your PWV region would be mining related industries, iron and steel, engineering, chemical industries, finance and your service industries. Now when we're looking at your Durban Pinetown region, the factors favoring industrial location would firstly be your market. So again, there's going to be a large local population and your demand from your KwaZulu-Natal and inland provinces. Next would be transport. Remember, this area is going to have a major seaport, which is your Durban Harbour, right? There's going to be good road and rail links. In terms of labor, there's going to be a large supply of semi-skilled and unskilled workers from your surrounding areas. So now because there's going to be a large population, there's going to be plenty supply of workers. In terms of raw materials, we're going to have a wide range of resources. So things like sugarcane, forestry, dairy, meat, and your imports obviously via the port. In terms of water, you're going to have good rainfall because remember, Durban is situated on the eastern half of the country, which is going to receive high rainfall. And it's going to have many rivers in the region, such as your Tugela River. In terms of power, it's going to receive electricity from Eskom's national grid and your local stations. And when we're talking about your relief, again your slope, it is going to be hilly terrain, but there's going to be enough space for industries near Pinetown and Durban. The factors that are going to hinder development will be your limited flat land, because remember, KZN is going to have your hilly land. That means it's going to have steep slopes. It's not going to be fully flat land. There's going to be congestion, strikes, and competition from your Gauteng industries. And when you're looking at your main industrial activities, we're going to be looking at things like oil refining. We're going to be looking at sugar processing, chemicals, textiles, motor vehicle assembly, and your ship repair and building. When we're looking at your Southwestern Cape, your factors that are going to be favoring industrial location will firstly be your market. So the Southwestern Cape is going to have a large urban population and a tourist market with a high purchasing power. In terms of transport, it's going to have obviously the Cape Town Harbour, and it's going to have an international airport and a good road network. In terms of labor, again, there's going to be skilled and semi-skilled workers available because of its dense population. In terms of raw material, there's going to be fish, fruit, wine, wheat, and imports via the harbour. In terms of water, you're going to have your dams and rivers which are going to supply water, but it's sometimes going to be limited. So there is going to be a shortage of water in the Western Cape. In terms of power, you're going to get electricity from Eskom. And in terms of relief, you're going to have your flat areas like the Cape Flats, which will be suitable for industries. In terms of your factors hindering development, firstly, it's going to be the distance from your other major markets, right? You can have occasional water shortages, and you can have your high transport costs inland. There's going to be few mineral resources, and you can have expensive power because it's located away from your major coal fields. Now, the main industrial activities taking place in your Southwestern Cape would be food processing, so things like wine, fruit, and fish. There's going to be textiles, clothing, electronics, ship repair, and petrochemicals. And your fourth region will be your Port Elizabeth Uitenhage region. Now this region is going to be located in your Eastern Cape. So the factors that are going to favor industrial location would firstly be your market, right? So this area is going to have a growing urban population and it's going to have links to your inland provinces. In terms of transport, it's going to have a good harbour. Remember, Port Elizabeth does have a harbour. It's going to have an airport and it's going to have rail connections. So that's basically going to link this region to your other places obviously in the country. In terms of labour, it's going to have a large supply of unskilled and semi-skilled workers. In terms of raw materials, there's going to be wool, there's going to be fish, citrus and manganese nearby. In terms of water, your rivers and dams are going to provide the water. And this location is going to be found in the wetter part of the country. In terms of power, again, it's going to receive electricity from the Eskom grid. And in terms of relief, it will have flat land, which obviously will allow for factory construction. Now, when we're looking at your factors that are going to hinder development, we're looking at your high poverty, your labor unrest, and your distance from Gauteng markets. And there's going to be no coal fields, so providing power is going to be an issue. Now, the main industrial activities in this area is going to be your motor vehicle assembly, so VW, Isuzu, etc. You're going to have your textiles, food processing and chemical industries, and also there's going to be the making of your leather goods. Now, when looking at strategies for industrial development, there's going to be your apartheid strategies and there's going to be your post-apartheid strategies. So in terms of your apartheid strategies, the first strategy would be your counter-urbanization. So that basically tried to reduce overcrowding in cities by forcing people to move back to the rural areas or your homelands. The Good Hope Plan, now in order to spread wealth in South Africa, the country was divided into 8 major development regions. Tax incentives were provided to encourage industrial growth. We had your deconcentration points, so new industrial towns were developed just outside of major cities to reduce urban growth. And we had your border industry nodes, so industries were located near homeland borders to create jobs and control urbanization. Now, in terms of your post-apartheid strategies, the first strategy will be your reconstruction and development program, so your RDP. Now, this strategy was adopted in 1994 and it was aimed to reduce inequality and provide basic needs like housing, water and electricity by using the resources available. Now, other claims also included providing jobs, improved facilities such as education and healthcare. However, the RDP strategy was stopped in 1996 due to a lack of money and infrastructure. Your next strategy will be your SDI, so your Spatial Development Initiatives. And this is going to be focused on developing specific areas with high economic potential. The next strategy would be your Growth, Employment and Redistribution, so GEAR. Now, this was started in 1996 and it's based on your RDP principles, but it was mainly aimed at fast economic growth, job creation in the formal sector, and stabilizing the economy. However, in 2001, GEAR failed because of a number of reasons, some of which including your poor quality of the houses constructed and increased unemployment, and obviously your rural areas did not have access to piped water. Another strategy would be your industrial development zones, your IDZs, and these are going to be your special zones near ports, airports to attract foreign investment and boost exports. The next strategy would be your Accelerated and Shared Growth Initiative for South Africa, which was started in 2006, right? And it planned to halve poverty and unemployment through faster economic growth. Now, it had the following objectives. The first was the development of better infrastructure. Next was the promotion of economic growth. And it then was basically providing quality education and improving the skills of people. We have your Special Economic Zones, so your SEZs. And these are going to be areas with tax incentives and support to attract industries and investors. And the last strategy would be your National Development Plan, so your NDP. And this was basically a long-term vision, right, to about 2030. And that was focusing on reducing poverty, inequality, and creating sustainable jobs. So now we're looking at your industrial centralization and decentralization. So industrial centralization is basically when your many industries are going to be grouped together in one area. So what are some advantages of your centralization? Firstly, you're going to have your economies of scale. That means that industries close together are going to reduce costs of production, transport, and distribution, right? Secondly, you can have your job opportunities. So concentration of industries are going to create many jobs in one area. Thirdly, infrastructure development. So roads, electricity, and water supply are all going to improve where your industries cluster. Your fourth advantage will be support services. So access to banks, training institutions, suppliers, and repair services. Fifth would be knowledge and skills sharing. So workers and companies are going to benefit from being close to each other and other industries. Your sixth advantage would be export hubs. So centralized industries near ports like Durban, Cape Town are going to improve your trade efficiency. And seventh, you can have your market growth. So consumers and other businesses are going to be nearby, and that's going to increase demand for certain goods. Now, just like we have advantages, we also have your disadvantages of centralization. Now, your first issue is going to be overcrowding. Now, too many people move to industrial areas, right? And that's going to cause housing shortages, it's going to cause congestion, and it's going to cause your informal settlements to rise up as well. Your second disadvantage would be pollution, right? So air, water, and land pollution are all going to increase where your many industries are going to be concentrated. Thirdly, you're going to have your overdependence. So the economy relies too heavily on one area. So when the economy is going to rely too heavily on one area, if it is going to decline, it's going to affect the whole country. The fourth disadvantage would be inequality. So rural and peripheral areas are going to be left underdeveloped. You're going to have your traffic and infrastructure strain, so too much pressure on roads, electricity, and water systems. You're going to have a high cost of living, so that means your rent, your food, and services are all going to rise in industrial hubs. You're going to have labor issues, right? So strikes or unrest in one area can halt production nationally. And obviously, number 8 would be your uneven spread of wealth. Now, industrial decentralization is going to be when industries are moved out of cities to smaller towns or rural areas. So what are some reasons to move out of urban areas? Now, these are going to be known as your push factors. So here's a very nice table that's going to give you the reasons to move out of urban areas, right? So your push factors. Again, please feel free to pause the video and take a screenshot, or you can just pause the video now to read it. And this is the next table that you are welcome to take a screenshot of. And these are going to be the reasons to move into your rural area. So these are going to be known as your pull factors. So now let's look at your IDZs, so your industrial development zones. Now in this video, I'm not going to include every single one. I'm just going to give you the definition. I'm going to give you what they offer, and I'm going to give you examples of them, right? If I am going to include all of them, this video is going to end up being 2 or 3 hours long. However, I will make a separate video focusing on each and every single one, right? So firstly, what is an IDZ? These are going to be your special industrial areas near airports or harbors that are going to attract investment by offering benefits to industries. So what do IDZs exactly offer? The first would be world-class infrastructure. So there's going to be modern roads, utilities, communication networks, and reliable services to support industries and attract tenants. Secondly would be your proximity to transport hubs. So it's going to be located near airports, harbors, or railways, making import and export of goods faster and cheaper. Thirdly, you're going to have your tax incentives. That means that companies are going to benefit from reduced taxes or special allowances, which will lower your business costs. You're then going to have your customs and duty benefits. So businesses in IDZs can import raw materials and export finished products with fewer restrictions and reduced tariffs. You're going to have your cluster opportunities. So industries working in similar sectors are going to be grouped together, and that's going to allow them to share resources and knowledge. You're going to have your job creation incentives. So support is going to be given to companies that employ and train local people, helping reduce poverty. You're going to have your investment support. So government and development agencies are going to provide guidance, funding options, and simplified regulations to attract investors. And some examples of IDZs would be Coega, so that's going to be near your Port Elizabeth. You can have your East London IDZ, your Richards Bay IDZ, and your OR Tambo IDZ. So now let's take a look at your spatial development initiatives, so your SDIs. Now these are going to be government programs that are going to focus on developing specific geographic areas with high economic potential by improving infrastructure, attracting investment and creating jobs. Some key objectives of SDIs include, firstly, to promote regional economic growth. So it's going to boost development in targeted areas with untapped potential. It's going to attract investment, so it's going to encourage both local and foreign investors to develop industries. It's going to create jobs, so it's going to provide employment opportunities in chosen regions. There's going to be the development of infrastructure, so there's going to be improved roads, rail, ports and communication systems to support industries. Another objective would be to encourage exports, and that's going to focus on industries that can earn foreign exchange through exports. And you're going to have your reduced inequality, which is going to spread development to your less developed regions instead of just focusing on major cities. And here's an example of some SDIs in South Africa. So today we're going to be taking a look at the tertiary sector as well as the informal sector. So the tertiary sector is going to be part of the economy that's going to provide services rather than producing goods. So like I mentioned in a previous video, if you can think of a service that's going to be provided in your community, then most likely that's going to be part of the tertiary sector. Now the tertiary sector is going to support both the primary and the secondary sectors by transporting, selling and marketing their products. So let's take an example, right? Let's say in the primary sector, you're going to extract wood from the natural environment. Now in the secondary sector, that wood is then going to be transformed into something useful, like a table or a cupboard. Now in the tertiary sector, we're going to have our transport companies which are going to transport this cupboard or this table from where it's made in the secondary sector to the customer. So that's basically how your tertiary sector is going to support both the primary or the secondary sector. And it also provides essential services to people and businesses. So what are some examples of jobs in the tertiary sector? Firstly, you're going to have your truck drivers, your pilots, your ship captains. You're then going to have your bankers, your accountants, your lawyers. You have your doctors, your nurses or your teachers, as well as your lecturers. Remember, if you think about it like this, I'm also going to be part of the tertiary sector because I'm providing you with a service, right? I'm teaching you rather than providing you with actual product, which could be a textbook, right? We also have your shop assistants. Think of your cashiers, your sales managers. Now, another important factor would be the contribution of the tertiary sector to the South African economy. So what is the first contribution of the tertiary sector to the South African economy? Firstly, you're going to have a contribution to the GDP. The tertiary sector is going to be the largest contributor to the South African economy, making up more than 60% of the GDP. Because remember, most people are going to be working in the tertiary sector. Secondly, it will be job creation, right? So the tertiary sector is going to provide the most employment opportunities in South Africa. Millions of people work in retail, banking, education, healthcare, tourism and transport. Thirdly, the tertiary sector is going to earn foreign exchange because your tourism, your international trade and your financial services are going to bring in your foreign currency, and that's going to strengthen the economy. Your tertiary sector is going to support your other sectors, right? So transport is going to move your agricultural goods, minerals and manufactured products. Remember, once all the minerals have been mined, those minerals are going to have to be transported via your trucks, via your trains, and that's all going to be part of the tertiary sector. Banking and insurance are going to help your farmers, your miners and industries grow. Education and healthcare are going to improve your workforce productivity. And lastly, you're going to have your infrastructure development. So the tertiary sector is going to expand services like roads, airports, railways, ICT and electricity. Basically, it's going to help connect South Africa to the global economy. So now we get to the informal sector, right? And from the name, you can sort of get an idea of what it's all about. The informal sector is part of the economy which consists of businesses that operate without formal contracts, registration or government regulation. So basically, they're going to be unregistered, right? It's usually going to include small-scale, unregistered businesses, self-employment, and casual work. Now, examples may include your street vendors, your hawkers, your street barbers. Also, if you were like me and you went to a public school, think about the auntie that's going to be sitting outside the school selling things, right? She's going to be part of the informal sector. Now, sometimes the informal sector can be called by different names. It can be called the second economy. It can be called the hidden economy. So if you do see that in an exam, just know we're talking about the informal sector. So what are some characteristics of the informal sector? Firstly, it's going to be made up of self-employed workers, right? People are going to be working for themselves. They're going to be selling their own goods. Very often, it's mainly going to have women and children involved in this sector. Now, if you think about it, how many times have you seen women selling stuff on the side of the road, right? In fact, it's mostly going to be women and children. The businesses are going to be unregistered and often unregulated by the government. Remember, they're not going to pay any tax at all. There's going to be limited access to formal finance or banking. Again, no bank is going to give a loan to a person that's going to be selling things on the side of the road. They're going to operate in both your urban and your rural areas. There's going to be flexible working hours and low startup costs. Remember, it's not going to cost much just to sit on the side of the road selling your products as compared to setting up a whole store, registering the store, buying stock. It's going to mainly be a characteristic of a developing country. Remember, South Africa is a developing country. There's going to be unsafe and unhealthy working conditions. Remember, these people are going to be working in all weather conditions, under the hot sun, under heavy rain, and some of them even get knocked on the side of the road. So it's very unhealthy and it's very unsafe. And lastly, there's going to be no contribution to the GDP in the form of taxes, because remember, they don't pay any taxes. Now, what is the importance of the informal sector? Remember, if you're in an exam and you're struggling to remember these, just think of all the benefits or the importance of receiving an income. Remember, the informal sector is going to provide employment and a source of income for people who cannot find formal jobs. Remember, in today's day and age, a lot of people cannot find a formal job. That's why so many people are going to resort to the informal sector to try to earn a living. So the informal sector is going to reduce crime by creating employment. Remember, people will not resort to crime if they receive an income. Thirdly, we're going to have your income generation. So this is going to help people earn a living and it's going to help them to support their families. The informal sector is going to provide support to the formal sector by supplying goods and services to formal businesses. And another importance of the informal sector would be skill development. Remember, it's going to offer opportunities for entrepreneurship and experience. Now, what are some reasons for the development of the informal sector? So firstly, why does the informal sector exist and why is it growing? So the first reason would be high unemployment. Remember, many people cannot find formal jobs. Think about how many jobs are being lost due to mechanization, right? Your farming machines are taking over. Especially now in 2025 and 2026 going forward, think about how many jobs are going to be lost due to AI. Also, people do not have your formal qualifications, and that is going to cause them to not be able to find jobs. Another thing that South Africans are experiencing, even if they do have a degree, a qualification, they still cannot get the job because they do not have any experience, right? Remember, employers, they want experience. So another reason for the development of the informal sector would be poverty. Remember, people start small businesses in order to survive. Another reason would be because your immigrants are not able to find your legal employment, right? Therefore, they're going to enter this informal sector in order to survive. Remember, a lot of them do not have any paperwork. Now remember, in the informal sector, there's going to be low startup costs, and therefore it's going to require little capital to begin. There's going to be flexibility, right? You can operate without strict regulations or formal contracts. And just like any other sector, the informal sector will experience problems, right? Sometimes more than others. Remember, the first problem that's going to be faced by the informal sector would be the lack of capital. So there's going to be a great difficulty in accessing loans or financial support. Now remember, this is going to lead to these vendors that are going to go borrow money from people that will charge them very high interest rates, right? And that's going to lead them to always being in debt because they are going to constantly be borrowing in order to pay back other loans, right? Now, these traders are going to be constantly harassed by authorities because remember, informal sector activities are going to be considered illegal. Now, for example, when I was in high school many years ago, the auntie that used to sit outside selling things, the school actually chased her away, right? They told us it was because the snacks that she used to sell was very unhealthy. And then a few weeks later, we actually found out that the real reason why they chased her away was because she was making much more money than the school tuck shop. Now, thirdly, there's not going to be any legal protection for these vendors, right? So workers and businesses are not covered by any labor laws. There's going to be poor working conditions, right? You're going to have limited access to safe workspaces, sanitation, or equipment. So basically, these hawkers are going to sell things on the side of the road, right? On the pavement. And that means that they're going to be exposed to rain, to these hot temperatures, and very often, like I mentioned earlier, they will get knocked and die. So it is very difficult for them to earn a living. There's going to be a lot of competition from your formal sector. Remember, larger companies can outcompete these small informal businesses. So many operators have minimal formal education or business training. There's going to be unstable income, so your earnings are going to be unpredictable and seasonal. Some days these hawkers might not make any money. Some days they may make a lot of money. And like we mentioned earlier again, banks do not grant loans to traders. And lastly, there's going to be the lack of infrastructure, right? There's going to be poor roads, electricity, and water supply, and that will limit their growth. So what are some measures to improve the informal sector? So basically provide small, low interest loans to start or expand businesses, host skill development and training, so offer workshops on business management, marketing, and finance. Infrastructure support, improve roads, electricity, water, and sanitation in areas with informal businesses, right? They can provide hawkers with stalls in these areas. That'll make their lives a lot easier, right? Legal recognition and protection. So you're going to have to register these informal businesses and provide social security benefits. Market access support, help informal traders reach bigger markets or sell to informal businesses. And provide your government incentives, so reduce taxes, provide subsidies, or create programs that support your small businesses. And that's it for today, guys. I hope this video helped you guys understand the tertiary and informal sector a little better. I want to thank you so much for watching, and I want to wish you all the best for your exams and tests. May God bless you all. Once again, thank you so much for being here. And remember, stay cool, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Thank you.